words like treasonous or traitor, those types of words. That's when somebody does that, and it's what we here in the States call TDS, or Trump derangement syndrome, where some of the partisan opponents get so worked up and so angered at President Trump that they basically kill their entire argument by discrediting themselves with wild accusations that aren't at all accurate.
Hi, I'm here.
On that note, I want to get John Schindler. Exactly. Here you go, John Schindler. This is your opportunity.
Okay.
You tweeted this, by the way. While you're speaking, I'm going to put up your tweet. Go ahead. And because you did call the president a traitor.
Yeah, well, I'm not stuck on the term. It has legal meaning. What I am stuck on is the president's conduct in Helsinki, which no one who is not a hardcore Trumper or paid to be thinks the president didn't mean with his fake apology yesterday, which he immediately turned around on Twitter and turned it 180 again. He's back to blaming the intelligence community, blaming everyone but Vladimir Putin and himself for the debacle in Helsinki, which even most fellow Republicans, even Newt Gingrich, have admitted publicly was a disaster. There's no way to spin this without Trump not being Trump. This is the culmination of years of Trump's bizarre behavior towards Putin and the Kremlin, culminating in a presser for the world that no one will ever forget.
John Schindler, why do you think then he's acting this way? You call the behavior treasonous, whatever you want to call it. We're not stuck on the term. You're saying basically he's been cozying up in a way that doesn't make sense to the president of Russia. Why do you think that is?
There are, at this point, only two possibilities. Just two. One is the president has some sort of concealed clandestine relationship with Russian interests, the state or otherwise, which are not new, which is driving him toward behaviors that are exactly contrary to his own government's policies, as Jason Miller correctly pointed out, or he's frankly deranged and isn't fit for office. There's no way to explain this. This is no president in American history has ever done anything like this. I'm a historian. I know these things. This is utterly unprecedented, uncharted waters for our republic here.
Jason, your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think what John is missing here, and I think that he's certainly someone who has the background to realize the full chessboard that we're looking at on the world stage, is we look at the hot spots when we talk about Syria and Iran. We look at North Korea. We look at where Ukraine is right now. Obviously, we wish the previous administration had been tougher with Russia when Russia took over Crimea. But we need Russia's help and cooperation in a number of these fronts. It's vital to both our interests, to Israel's interests, and to a number of our other allies in Europe. And to go and just simply discount and say we're no longer going to try to have a good relationship with Russia or try to improve upon that, I think is very naive. I think that's not looking at the threats that are facing the country and the challenges that are coming at us. And so what I think President Trump is trying to do is get ourselves to a better place. Now, I wish he'd been tougher with Putin when he was on the stage with him in Helsinki. I absolutely agree with that. But I was glad to see that the president came out and made very clear that he trusts our intelligence, he backs our intelligence, and he made that very clear from his press event that he did yesterday.
No, that's simply not true. That is a lie. That is spin. That is not true, Jason.
No, that's what he said. He said that very clearly.
Okay, first of all,
are you saying
those of us who question Russia are naive? You actually believe the president when he said that, despite calling the IC Nazis? Really?
I say to turn a blind eye to the I don't know where you're getting in this throwing out crazy stuff.
Oh, you
like
don't
that.
know?
But
really? You've been looking at a rock for the last year and a half?
And for Syria and Iran and also North Korea,
okay, let me speak. Russia's cooperation.
Sorry.
You said we're naive for not working with Russia?
Yeah, go ahead.
We're naive for not
you think we're naive for my time, Jason?
Sorry, Jason, just one moment. John, respond to that. That the belief that
you said we're naive
with
for
Russia.
thinking.
But let me ask you the question,
naive.
John.
No, that's what is naive, is thinking we can trust Putin as a good faith partner on anything. Yes, we should work with Russia from a position of our strength, not theirs, which the president just gave to them as the greatest gift he's ever given anyone on that stage in Helsinki, and it will not be forgotten by our allies.
John,
we are now terrified.
And John, we're actually, I think in a lot of ways we're saying, John, I think we're saying a very similar thing here. If you just keep the temperature down just a little bit. And that if, I think you and I would agree, and tell me if you don't, that if we're going to get anything done in Syria or with Iran, or even if you talk about North Korea or with Ukraine, we have to have some buy-in, some level of cooperation with Russia. I mean, we're simply not going to make progress without.
May I respond?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
If we can get Russian buy-in It is incredibly naive of you, because you have no background in Russia whatsoever, to think we're going to get buy-in from Vladimir Putin from anything other than a position of unambiguous strength by the West side. Yes, we need their cooperation. The kind of cooperation they will give us voluntarily is not helpful cooperation. We need them to work with us when we are helping set at least 50% of the agenda, not giving the Russians everything they want, which is what the president promised them on that stage.
John, let me ask Jason this question. Sorry, let me ask the question, please. What do you think the U.S. and Russia can do together on Syria? They're on opposite sides of this conflict for all intents and purposes. And Russia has basically supported... Sorry, John, I'm asking Jason this. The Russian president and the Kremlin supports and has supported the regime of Bashar al-Assad that has bombed civilian areas for years now. What is it that the U.S. and Russia can do together to try to now come to a peaceful solution after all these years of supporting this regime by Moscow?
The only way that we're ever going to get Assad to quit murdering his people in such a vicious way that we've seen over these last years is if Putin starts telling him to knock it off and starts putting some force on Assad to stop this. I mean, that's one clear thing right there. And so until we get that,
but how does the U.S. I'm unclear, because the president did not elaborate at all on what was discussed in that meeting. I'm unclear how the U.S. and Russia can work together.
Well, we know that Russia doesn't want these economic sanctions on their businessmen, on their businesses, to remain in place forever. So that's obviously one massive tool that we have. And also the other thing too is, I mean, look, the U.S. is still the dominant superpower in the world, and so Putin has to take that into consideration.
John,
can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I actually think this may be one area where Jason and I are probably on a very similar page here. I am a realist. And I think there's very little the U.S. can do in Syria now to mitigate the Assad regime's horrible, disgusting, probably genocidal behavior, which is aided and abetted by Moscow and Tehran. The reality is, this is not Donald Trump's fault. This one really is not. This goes back to 2013 when Obama walked away from his own red line in Syria. And ever since then, that in effect outsourced U.S. policy to Moscow and to some extent Tehran. And the Obama administration never picked up those pieces, and we can't expect Trump to. That's not fair. I mean, I'm a fair person about this, and Syria is not Trump's fault. And our leverage, frankly, over the Russians in Syria is relatively minimal. That's just reality. When the Russians get out of line, we will smack them down, as we did a few months ago with the Wagner mercenaries in Syria. But our ability to overall change the dynamic of that horrible, awful conflict at this point is pretty limited.
Very briefly, the Democrats are I want to just change the topic here. Democrats are calling for Donald Trump's interpreter to testify on Capitol Hill. Very briefly, Jason, what do you make of that? Good idea or a bad idea? We don't know what happened in that meeting.
I think that they're grasping to try to get the interpreter. I would urge the administration to put out as much information as possible. Obviously, if there are things that are sensitive or classified, and maybe that might not be for full public consumption, and I'll tell you why. We know from both the president and from Putin in the comments that he made in the Helsinki press conference that Trump did raise a number of these hotspots, as I talked about Syria and Iran and North Korea and such. So we know that President Trump engaged him on a number of these fronts. I think this is a position of strength for the administration to come out and say, here's where I pressed Putin. And to John's point about where some of these problems have come up previously with Syria and going back to the previous administration, here's the bottom line, is that there have been a lot of experts who've been saying, here's how we need to do things in these hotspots for years, and it hasn't worked. I mean, these problems are not getting better. So I will give Trump credit for trying to do things differently. I would like to know, as someone, give us some more tangible signs of progress that you made in that meeting, because I think you
Jason,
probably did.
I appreciate that, but that wasn't the question. Very briefly, Democrats calling for Trump's interpreter in that Helsinki one-on-one with Putin. Good idea or bad idea, John Schindler?
Bad idea only because I think we need to think about that unfortunate State Department employee who was the translator, who shouldn't really be put on the spot like this. It's a really bad precedent. And as much as I don't like Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin, or whatever that may be, he does have a right as a president to have those conversations kept secret, at least for now. That is part of international diplomacy. So I think making an example of a government employee who's just an innocent translator here is, as much as I'd like to know what was said, I don't think that's a good precedent our country should go down. I really don't.
All right. Thank you. Well, you've agreed on that. Jason Miller and John Schindler. Thanks to both of you for joining us. We appreciate the spirited discussion. We'll take a quick break here on CNN. We'll be right back. Stay with us.